how to do jazz hands, so sorry about that. To start off, I see many familiar faces in here, but just in case you don't know about KCBX, we're the local public radio station, the only one based in San Luis Obispo County, and you'll find NPR news and programs, our local news, and hours of music every day. Much of it actually played on vinyl and from CDs. And we're located at 90.1 FM on your radio dial or at kcbx.org. You can stream us anytime. KCBX was founded 50 years ago, and the one through line from 1975 to today is really our community and our supporters and you all in this room. Often people think that public radio stations like KCBX operate largely with federal funds, but that's really not true. We are supported by the community through donations, through business sponsors who have messages on the radio, and also through events like the Live Oak Music Festival. That's our biggest fundraising event of the year that maybe some of you have attended. First, though, I want to step back, and I'll talk about public funding in a little bit, but I do want to step back in time to 1972, when two Steves, as we call them, Steve Burrell and Steve Urbani, had a dream to start a community radio station. Now, I don't think this is actually the average dream of a 20-somethings, but this was their dream. They were in commercial radio, but they also understood about community radio, and they wanted to start a station, and because Steve Urbani was a Cal Poly grad, they decided on San Luis Obispo that would be the ideal place to return and to start a community radio station. So there's a couple stories from those years. Before KCBX was finally licensed to broadcast, people actually began wandering into the studios on Higuera Street in the Warden building. They offered to lend tapes and produce programs and answer phones and just really started, that's kind of where the beginning of its community radio. The community stepped in. In July 1975, after a delay, because the FCC lost the original application, official permission to go on air was received via telegram. This was 1975. And early on, the station actually moved from Higuera onto Churro Street, 1026 Churro, which happened to be right across from the chamber at the time. And this location leads to a couple of stories. First of all, office copy machines at the time were a new technology. They were very expensive and they were outside of the budget of the station. And so Dave Garth, who was an early supporter, been a supporter of the station, he set up a KCBX account on the chamber copier so that we could get copies made. There was a little back and forth across the street, obviously. The other interesting story about that time as well, being on Churro Street upstairs, they happened to be upstairs from Bull's Tavern, which apparently, according to Steve Urbani, they used it as a meeting space quite often. Apparently there was even board meetings there. And they even set up a phone extension so they wouldn't miss any calls. It's my understanding that KCBX was a really early customer of Call America, so I'm not sure if Jeff had anything to do with setting up that extension. And he's nodding his head yes, so apparently he did. So, of course, we now have modern equipment. We can communicate, not by telegram, by emails, but again, it's really about the community, our staff, our volunteers, our listeners, and our supporters. I did a little math. I have an accounting degree, so sometimes I do math. And annually, we air nearly 4,500 hours of locally hosted music by our 24 volunteer music hosts and also our music director. We have 500 local news stories from our small but mighty news team, and we feature more than 1,100 arts, entertainment, and nonprofit events on our online and on-air community calendar. Additionally, each year, more than 500 volunteers help us put on Live Oak Music Festival, our largest fundraising event, which, Father's Day weekend, tickets are available. It's out, great camping and family fun out at El Chorro Regional Park. Anyway, extrapolate those numbers, and I'm fairly certain that each of you in this room has some connection to the station. The question, though, might come to mind, if the community is really the primary source of funding and support, then why do public radio stations like KCBX need federal funding? Public media, by definition, is media that's funded by the government for the public. Public broadcasting systems exist in almost every democracy, and governments around the world created publicly funded media systems in order to fill information needs that would not be met by commercial media. There's a lot of, rural areas, commercial radio doesn't even reach there. In 99% in the US, 99% of the population is reached by public radio, and that's free for people to listen. All you need is a radio. You don't need an internet connection. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting is an independent nonprofit that distributes federal funds, an average of $1.60 per American. That's for all public broadcasting, which includes NPR stations and PBS stations and other public radio and media stations. And that money is used to invest in programming and services to each community's needs. So the primary amount, most of the funds distributed by CBT are delivered to the station. Funds for CBB account for 12% of KCBX's annual budget. For many rural stations, that percentage is much larger. In addition to the direct funds, stations throughout the U.S. receive in-kind resources through satellite interconnections that allow us to share programming and to broadcast national, state, and local emergency alerts at the push of a button. Finally, all of our music licensing is actually negotiated and paid for by CPB, that's really important. While the possible elimination of federal funding has us kind of on uncertain funding, what we're sure of is that KCBX will be here going forward. Our colleagues at public radio stations and in Washington and NPR are determined to figure out a way forward. And we know that we have you, our Central Coast community, that has so generously supported us in the last 50 years. And we really do appreciate all that the community does for us. And we are just honored to do what we can for our community. Thank you.